Like to go ahead and get started. And sorry for the delay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. They're filming it, and so we're going to make this available, and we're going to go through the presentation even though we only have a few folks. So you want to go to the first slide. For those that don't know me, I'm Lily Thomas. I'm with the Marin County Community Development Agency. And before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge that Supervisor Connolly from District 1 is here. Thanks for being here. And to thank the folks who have helped tonight, Aline Tenaline, Marilee Valera Ramirez, Debbie LaRue, and Genevieve Honker, who've helped set up and make this meeting. And then we also have Francisco Gonzalez, who's doing interpreting. So just to kind of set the stage, our goal for tonight is to prepare for the board workshop on Just Cause for Evictions, which is next week on the 11th of September at 5:30 in the evening. And we wanted to answer any questions that people have tonight, be able to kind of delve into it a little bit deeper, and tell you different ways that you can participate. You can attend the board meeting, you can send an email. We have some sheets in front of you that you can submit comments. And then I'm going to go through the materials. We have a ton of materials for you, including there's the staff report. So if you have a copy of the staff report, I'll reference it and tell you kind of where some of the information is available in the staff report. We have a copy of the PowerPoint if you want to take notes on that. We also have some frequently asked questions and a copy of a summary of the work plan that was adopted in 2016, as well as some yellow cards for questions and the white sheets for comments. So we have lots of pieces of paper for you tonight. So there's just, with the few people that we have, if you have questions, go ahead and ask as we go along if you need some clarification. Tonight we're going to talk about just cause policies, but first I thought it would be helpful to understand the background of how we got here. And I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a little bit awkward that I'm standing here with a microphone in front of just a few people when we were expecting a lot more people. So in 2015, the Community Development Agency, the door's open. The Community Development Agency did a survey of renters, and they got about 1,000 responses to that survey. And the results were not surprising, but they were still disturbing. We found from that survey that renters were worried about losing their housing, they were worried about the steep rent increases, and about the insecurity that they were feeling in their housing. And so kind of out of that survey, the board held a series of workshops and eventually adopted a work plan on preserving housing affordability and preventing displacement. And on that work plan, there was a number of different programs, a whole kind of laundry list of programs, including the Landlord Partnership Program, which is intended to increase access for folks who have Section 8 by making more housing available to them through incentives for landlords. And that's available throughout the county, both in the incorporated cities and in the unincorporated county. The source of income protection was also related to Section 8, and that requires that folks who are listing housing consider somebody with a Section 8 voucher on the same equal footing as they consider somebody who doesn't have Section 8. So that again is intended to increase access for folks who have Section 8. And then the mandatory mediation program is a mediation program operated on our behalf through the district attorney's office. the Consumer Protection Unit. And if there is a rent increase of 5% or more, then a tenant or landlord has the option of requesting a mediation. And there's no specific outcome that has to come out of that mediation, but the parties need to sit down together and discuss the rent increase and why they need, if it's on the landlord side, kind of what their reasons are that they need it, they had increased taxes, et cetera, or on the tenant side, kind of what the impact was for them. And that, again, is in the unincorporated part of the county only. So in addition to these actions, the work plan included the consideration of a just cause for eviction policy. And the board has discussed just cause policies a number of times since then, including on June 12th, 2018, when the board received the initial recommendations from the Community Advisory Group and the Steering Committee on the county's assessment of fair housing. And both of those groups identified the just cause policies as a priority recommendation to promote fair housing in Marin. And so subsequently, in response to that recommendation, the board has scheduled the workshop for September 11th at 5:30 to provide direction to staff on whether to proceed with a just cause ordinance or to delete it from the work plan. So before we kind of talk more in detail about just cause policies, we thought it would be interesting, it would be helpful to kind of frame what it's like to rent in Marin. And talk about why are we discussing just cause policies? And do we have an eviction problem in Marin? And to answer this, I think we need to look at and understand renting in Marin, and specifically around our low vacancy rate. When you look at the home ownership vacancy rate that we have in Marin, we have one of the lowest in the Bay Area, less than 1% for homeowner vacancy rate. And how that relates to these policies is that many renters who would normally be considering moving to home ownership because of the really low vacancy rate for homes are not able to do that. So it just further impacts the rental market, making it, you know, the low vacancy rate further impacted. In addition, we have a low vacancy rate among rentals, about a little less than almost 3%, and that's further impacted by the issue of short-term rentals, especially in the west part of the county. And then one way to understand the possible implications of a just cause ordinance is to consider two families who moved to Marin in 2009. And one of those families is able to buy a home, and the other family is paying rent. And so the family who purchased a home is not only able to build equity of almost 80% during that time since 2009, but they also have been able to have stability in their home, where they're not worried that their children are going to be displaced from their school, et cetera. Meanwhile, the renter who moved in 2009 has experienced almost a 50% rent increase in the cost of rent. And they also have been subject to not being sure if they're going to be able to stay in their home. And if you think about this in the context of fair housing, folks who are minorities, who are disabled, who are members of the protected class are more likely to be renters. So this should be looked at in the light of the fair housing context. And then, again, the tight rental market is impacted farther by the fact that folks who would be moving to homeownership are not able to do that. And this affects kind of choice and mobility. And folks, if there's issues in a rental as far as habitability, et cetera, people are not able to move out as much as they would be. And again, looking at renting in Marin, we have about 19,000 people in the county who are rent burdened. And what that means is that they're paying more than 30% of their income for rent, and they don't have enough left over for basic necessities such as food, medical care, or transportation. And under California state law, a security deposit can be about twice rent, or it can be twice the monthly rent. And so in Marin, we're seeing security deposits around $5,000 as a typical security deposit, which is a lot. If you're a renter, you need to, if you're experiencing an unexpected move, then you need to be able to have $5,000 at the ready to pay for that security deposit to move into a new place. And you can contrast that with a recent study that you may have heard about, where the Federal Reserve found that 4 in 10 Americans don't have $400 readily available for an emergency. So having $5,000 is a lot to expect a renter to have in Marin when they're paying that much for it. Again, in your staff report on page 6 through 8, I forgot to be referencing it, there's more information about the specifics about what is in a just cause for eviction ordinance. But an eviction occurs when a residential tenant is forced from their home by action or decision of a landlord or property owner. An eviction is known as a lease termination, typically takes the form of a 30 or 60-day notice. So that's typically how long, depending on whether you've lived in your home for less than a year, then you get 30 days notice, and if it's longer, it's 60 days. And what just cause policies do is that they require that a landlord provide a reason for terminating a rental agreement, so that there is a specific reason that is given, whether it is because the owner is moving in, or there's major rehabilitation, or some examples of it. So on page 6 this information is on page 6. And some landlords have concerns around just cause, that it's going to prevent them from evicting tenants, that it's going to raise the cost of an eviction. For example, if somebody is not paying their rent or they're violating their lease. And just to be clear, just cause evictions do not prevent those types of evictions if you're violating your lease. Other concerns are about the cost of doing business, that those could increase based on a just cause for eviction ordinance. So those are some of the concerns that we've heard. Also, there's concern that just cause for eviction will lead to rent control. And to be clear, just cause for eviction does not affect the amount that a landlord can raise the rent. It does not. So it's not going to affect cases like we've read about recently in San Rafael, where there was a 40% rent increase across the apartment. And to be clear, our board has taken the position that they do not want rent control. So I think that it's important that we are clear that just cause is not going to be the answer to some of the main rent increases that we're going to have. The Board of Supervisors decided that when we presented the work plan early on, and there was a number of reasons, including, the concern that it would impact the amount of rentals that would be available on the market, the condition of them, among kind of other reasons. With the concern that the conditions of rental housing stock would not be maintained under rent control. So you already have. So under just cause ordinances, they usually distinguish between 2 types of evictions, either for cause or no fault. And for cause are typically when somebody is not paying their rent, when there's a lease violation, and a no fault includes things like an owner move-in, they're turning the home back into a condo, or they're removing it from the rental market. And sometimes those types of the no fault often ordinances include relocation costs or the right to return to that unit as part of the ordinance. And just cause policies can also provide clarity for all of the parties involved, especially for smaller landlords who may not have a formal written rental agreement. And just cause policies have been used in California since 1980, and most recently have been used in the Bay Area as a tool to address rental markets with really low vacancy rates and ways to provide some stability for renters and prevent displacement. This is a list of some of the places around the Bay Area. And if you have the PowerPoint in front of you, just to make a quick correction, San Diego County has just cause on the ballot for November, but it hasn't been passed. And I think the copy in front of you might have it listed. So if the board does choose to move forward with the just cause ordinance, and at this point on Tuesday, they won't be making they're not adopting an ordinance, they're just deciding whether or not they would like to move forward with it. But some of the things that they're going to be asked to consider and think about if they do decide to move forward with it is the applicability of an ordinance. So would it apply to all rental homes in the unincorporated part of the county, for example, or would it apply to some subset? Some just cause ordinances exempt owner-occupied or accessory dwelling units, and that is some options that they would consider. Also, data collection. The board could opt to use a just cause ordinance to collect real-time data on the rental market, including on evictions and lease terminations and or on rent increases. And they could also look at relocation assistance and the right of return. And what that means is that in some cases, usually with a no-fault, relocation assistance can be required, or if there's a major rehabilitation, then a renter can be required to be offered the right to return and move back into that unit. And then finally, enforcement would need to be addressed. And what staff's recommendation is to model it after the source of income ordinance. And under this approach, just cause would be implemented as a complaint-driven ordinance, similar to the source of income. So the board recommendations are going to be to hold a workshop and receive public testimony and direct staff whether to draft a just cause ordinance or to discontinue or suspend the consideration of a just cause ordinance. And this is a number of different ways to participate. You can provide comments to the board by email. You can write on that little piece of paper that you have in front of you if there's anything that caught your attention. And you can attend the board workshop on the 11th at 5:30 in the evening. So that's my presentation. If people want to gather and talk, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Go ahead.
On the 11th, just cannot be there. Is there some way I can get information? Because I'd like to be kept up to date.
Yes, you can get information a number of ways. We have a website which is on this material, and if you go to that website, you can subscribe to our website and we'll send you updates. Okay. You can write a letter if you want to participate, but if you sign up on that, then we'll let you know kind of what happens at that board meeting. You can also watch it later on if you want to. If you have maybe some strong coffee with you, you can sit there and watch the board meeting at a later date. It's recorded. So.
Oh, it's recorded. So I could get access to that on this website?
Did you write down your contact information? We'll
Yes.
send you the link to the board,
Great.
to the board meeting.
Great, I like that, thank you.
I guess I'm a little unclear as to how and to what degree you expect this to affect the vacancy rate. I mean, are there targets that you're looking for? And I mean, if even with just cause, if you can still raise the rent, you can get people out that way.
Yeah, I don't think that it's going to change the vacancy rate, but I do think that it provides more of a sense of stability for folks, and coupled with the county's mandatory mediation, which doesn't doesn't prevent rent increases, but it does, what we heard last night from a property owner who has 600 rental units is that they're keeping their rent increases at 5%. Or below the 5%. So they're keeping them at that based on it, even though they don't have to, they are. So we're thinking that coupled with that mandatory mediation and just cause, that it just really provides some more stability. Because it's not going to affect the vacancy rate, but if somebody doesn't have to, if they don't have to move, then they don't have to worry so much about the vacancy rate.
Well, true. Can you give some scenarios, though, where this would protect somebody from being evicted that aren't already covered by existing standard leases and California law? I mean, there are grounds for evicting people, and certainly damage or destroying property is one of them, non-payment of rent. Where would this come in to prevent an eviction?
Well, I think that you might be thinking about eviction as an unlawful detainer.
Yes.
Right? So that's one way of thinking about an eviction. Another way of thinking about an eviction is a broader definition of eviction, which defines eviction as somebody's lease termination, their lease being terminated by no action or no choice of their own, right? So they've paid their rent on time, they've not damaged the unit, they haven't been a nuisance to others, they haven't violated their lease in any way, and so, but they can still get a termination notice, either a 30 or 60-day termination notice, depending on how long they've lived there, right? So,
right.
And what changes with a just cause is that unless there is one of those reasons that are listed, then you're not going to have an arbitrary lease termination.
Okay, so yeah, you just can't end the lease.
Right, unless there's one of those specific reasons.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that it's the least you could do. As he said, it really has no great effect. It's symbolic, and it would allow you to collect data. So, without any rent control, there is really no protection for tenants. You're essentially slaves to landlords. And the case you just mentioned with the 600 units, was that a landlord who wanted 5% every year? When you said 5%, 5% of what?
It was a maximum of that. I don't know if they did a...
Only because if you
Right.
think about the numbers,
Right.
600 units, 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%, is every worker getting 5% every year increase in their rate? It seems that there is, a disparate level of greed that we're all viewing. And ethnic cleansing is going on in our county in a very effective manner. And, it's just sad to see, because this is a county with history. Going back to the agricultural era and stuff like that, and it's turned into really just a bedroom community for the very, very rich. So I think that the just cause policy is absolutely the least gratuitous gesture one could give to working people who are losing more than 50% of their income to rent. And when you look at your chart in here about the rental, where the assumption is $60,000, think of the jobs, think of the people who serve you,
Right.
think of the people who answer the phone at your doctor's office, and the delivery people, and the food service workers, and everyone. Is everybody pulling 60 grand?
There's a lot of people who are making less than
I would say
30,000,
so.
absolutely.
And I would say in West Marin, absolutely.
right.
There's a large community
Right.
between 20 and 30.
Yes.
And it's like, it's absolutely, obviously we understand that that's not wanted and that we all should be at that 60, but I think that from the Board of Supervisors, it's absolutely the least you could do. And I have been ethnically cleansed, and I have had to move 4 counties away to be able to pay the rent, I will not be able to attend the meeting. So I would just say now that my note is absolutely the least you could do.
Go ahead. No, she's going to bring you the microphone so that they can record it.
For the recording.
I just wanted to share my situation. I've lived in Marin since 1978, and prior to a couple of years ago, I always rented houses in Mill Valley for long periods, 12 years at a time, 10 years at a time, and the reason I had to leave my last rental place was because the property was going to be sold, and they wanted to renovate it before selling. And so I found it was a desperate search. I couldn't find anything, and I'm currently in very substandard housing, and they raised the rent in an 11-month period 20%. And they certainly raise the rent every month. So I'm just really glad that we have at least access to a mandatory, I know it's not obligatory, opportunity, because I think they would not like the spotlight on them if they try to raise the rent, again, 20%. And I am looking for work despite my age, because I must. 100% of my Social Security check goes to rent now. And it's, that's well beyond the 30% that's considered appropriate. And some places that I tried to move to would not allow residents in their units unless the Social Security, it wasn't sufficient.
Right, you didn't make enough money for it to...
Because they only, they limited, you must make more than 30% of the rent in order to be able to reside there even. So it's a terrible market, actually.
It is. I would recommend that you consider getting on some waiting lists for...
I've been waiting listed for 5 years.
Okay.
But nothing's available.
Nothing's come up. Yeah.
No, and so I've just got to find a job somehow. There's a terrible age discrimination problem also.
Sorry.
Yeah, so it's
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else? All right. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that, oh yeah.